Hello team, third time lucky. This is me, Jonathan MS Pierce, with another ATP Geopolitics video, a Ukraine war frontline update for the 21st of November 2023. I've just recorded half the video until I realised that I hadn't actually pressed the button and had failed to start recording. Nonetheless, if you want to see what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. And we're going to go to the northeastern sector. That is, we're not in Horlivka anymore. I've just been talking about that. It's very interesting. We're in the northeastern sector, Kupiansk Svatova to Kreminna front line. No changes to the mapping and to the mappers that I refer to until you get just to the south of the Serebryansky forest and Kreminna there. But there is something that Mashevets, a military analyst or observer, says. Before we go there, it's worth noting that the weather is bad. The rains and snow have been hitting across the front line in the south and in the eastern parts of Ukraine, pertinent to the front line, and that is meaning that maneuvers are difficult. We've seen a drop in the stats over the last 2 days, and I'm sure that's largely down to the weather causing a bit of an issue. Also worth noting, this is from Michael Kaufman and Rob Lee, really, that they are talking about a slowdown of the war. Quote, the level of fighting has gone to a place where the individual tree lines all have a name. I mean, I think that's really indicative of how slow things are, given that you're fighting over a tree line for so long that it gets a name. The tree lines have become critical objectives. Rob Lee says 2 to 3 weeks ago that Ukrainian daily fire rate fell, and Russia now has a shell and FPV drone advantage. I'm pretty sure they'd have a shell advantage, given the Israel war has led to a 30% reduction in Ukrainian given shells. It appears that the shells are already due to go to Israel, and it's not that they've been redirected, it's they're actually getting to their original destination, because they were going to be redirected to Ukraine, and now that's not happening. I think that's probably what's happened mainly. But the idea that the Russians have a FPV drone advantage, I would doubt that's true. I mean, it might be. I'd like to see the evidence at any rate, because it's very easy to look at certain areas of the front line and see complaints of certain units and go, well, that's what's happening right across the front line. And all units are going to be calling out for more drones all the time. But the Ukrainians are getting a lot of drones compared to what the case was a year ago. I mean, it's quite incredible. But yeah, I may be erroneous in that conclusion myself. But I just like to see the data. Anyway, going to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, they say Ukrainian military observer Mashevets has stated that while Russian Western grouping forces in the Kupiansk direction has more personnel and equipment than the central grouping in the Kreminna direction, the central grouping maintains enough combat-ready units to conduct an offensive push, and the Russian military command desires such an operation. But the ISW says they've not seen any evidence of any proposed increase in the tempo of fighting. So that is Mashevets saying that the Russians have more equipment and troops in this area, but the central area around Kreminna, they are just as ready. They're ready to go, and they're looking to go in that area. Now, there have been several analysts saying that they expect Russia to attack somewhere in the northeast. This is one of their primary points of attack at some point, but I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I kind of sit on a fence. Not sure the worth of them doing that. We have seen them try and prod and probe in certain areas, and they do have this threat of more troops in the area. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now, there is some interesting changes here in the Bilohorivka area, just to the south of Kreminna, south of Serebryansky forest. This is Suryat map saying that there are Ukrainian gains, but as ever, it's reading between the lines. So Suryat map says that recent Russian bombardment east of Bilohorivka allowed us to correct the front line, showing the Ukrainian army managed to recover some of their lost positions on this axis. I don't think they've recovered lost positions. I would posit that they never lost those positions. Suryat map has a tendency to listen to the Russian MOD and be quite overconfident in the gains that the Russians make, and quite often then has to walk some of those claimed gains back, and that looks like, oh, the Ukrainians have retaken some lost ground. Well, actually, the Russians never had it in the first place, I would think. And when you look at Andrew Perpetua, he's a much more conservative mapper. He waits for the requisite evidence to push lines either way, and I think he's really objective. He's actually, when so many pro-Ukrainians call him a bit of a doom poster and spreading too much doom, I think he's much more likely to be realistic and objective and accurate, given criticisms from both sides. So I would, in many, not all the time, because sometimes Suriyat does get it and nail it correctly. I think some of the claims around Avdiivka recently have been on the money, and other claims around the front line. But then sometimes they're just really over enthusiastic about Russian gains. But so potentially some Ukrainian gains there, but probably more likely a rejigging of the map. Then we come down past the Seversk front, where it's quite quiet, past the northern Bakhmut direction where there's no map changes, and we'll go back to the ISW to see what they have to say about Bakhmut. And one Mill blogger claimed that the situation around Bakhmut has recently reached a turning point, and that Russian forces overcame a positional deadlock to shift control and regain positions between Klishchiivka and Andriivka. That is correct. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashevets noted that Russian forces have replenished their grouping in the Bakhmut area by redeploying elements of the 98th and 106th Airborne, so the VDV, these supposedly elite troops, although I don't think they are anymore, to the area from the Liman direction. He reported these VDV elements are mainly attacking towards the Ukrainian rear areas in the north. So these VDV elements being brought from Liman direction are supposedly attacking somewhere. It could well be the Kromove, Bodanivka, Bakivka, Yahidne sector that they are being utilized in. I'm not sure, but the Ukrainians are definitely under the cosh along the Bakhmut front, really. The Russians I do think they have changed the momentum there, and they do have the initiative. The question, as I said yesterday, is how many resources are they willing to throw at this? And likewise for the Ukrainians, how much do the Ukrainians want to hold on to their positions given that change in momentum? We shall see, I guess. As we move on down south to the Horlivka area, we can see that there are some gains here, and actually both mappers have gains, although the gains for Suriyat maps are into the grey zone, so it doesn't show up on my map. Anyway, Global War Monitor says Ukraine has expanded its area of control in the Horlivka-Pivdeni area, the Donetsk Oblast, the waste heap there, now controlling more territory than that Russia held since 2015. It's important to note that this was the purple line there is a 2015 line, so this is one of these rare occasions where the Ukrainians have got behind that and are having some success. Although the question, as I keep saying, is what's the end game for the Ukrainians there? As you can see, lots of area gained by the Ukrainians, but it is into the grey zone, so it doesn't change the mapping as we had it from yesterday. Situation in Horlivka front, despite the intense Russian bombardment, Ukrainian army continue taking positions at the 2014 defense line and in the no man's land there. So the no man's land being the grey zone, where they've advanced, the Ukrainians advance here. No change to the red line though. I know I've shown you this many times, but this, as you look at it, is the slag heap of as a result of the mining, and you can see all of these promontories, or these sticky out bits in the background as a result of the mining, as well as natural geographical features. The topography around these heaps is quite interesting, although it's somewhat flatter in the area where the Ukrainians have had some success here. To the south of that slag heap, it is still topographically variable around there. We've got some ups and downs and a bit of undulating landscape. Well, not quite undulating, but it's certainly not flat like it is in the southern Zaporizhia direction. Andrew Perpetua has some gains for the Ukrainians south of this waste heap. Quite a large area, I guess. It sort of goes from here all the way down to there. So what would that be in terms of as a crow flies, sort of 1.2 kilometers worth of gains wide, and then a little bit deep there for the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back in that direction. But yeah, what the end game is, I'm not quite sure. Then as we come down to Avdiivka, we can see that the Russians, as according to Andrew Perpetua, have made some gains north of Krasnohorivka. Basically that amount there, taking it up to the blue line. That's rather similar to what Suriyat maps and Deep State maps have, give or take. Luckily, no more gains at the moment for the Russians along the railway line and around Vesely, around Terikon, which is good. Although there is a mixed bag of nuts down here. So Suriyat maps having some gains around the industrial zone, or actually just south of the industrial zone for the Russians, and actually scaling back some of the gains they had for the Russians around the Tsarka restaurant. Let's go and get all my roads and whatnot in there. So the Tsarska Ochota restaurant here, they've been possibly pushed back from there to some degree. Let's go and have a look at some of the sources, see what the ISW has to say first. Russian mill bloggers claim that the Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defences near Yasny Varta, 2 stationed near the industrial zone southeast of Avdiivka, although ISW has not yet observed visual evidence of those gains. One prominent mill blogger praised competent coordination between Russian assault groups, the Russian aerospace forces, the VKS, and artillery for securing these claimed advances. Spokesperson for the Ukrainians noted that recent snowfall in the Avdiivka area has impacted operations and limited visibility for both Ukrainian and Russian forces, but reported that Russian forces continue efforts to break through to Avdiivka with small infantry assault groups. So it is tough around there. Suriyat map says the situation south of Avdiivka, so that's in this area. You can see that the Ukrainians have had some gains here, but the Russians a tiny bit of success there. The Russian army made small advances in the Vinogradniki Dacha. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian attempt to recover the lost territory at 450-kilometer point was repelled, but actually there's a change in territory there. So it's not that it was repelled. They appear to have made some gains, and that's caught on geolocated footage as well. Then as we come out of Avdiivka, fairly quick sort of spin through the front line here. It's tough around Avdiivka. I think Ukraine, I haven't changed any opinion about what's going on there. I think Ukraine is on a knife edge and they are going to find it very hard, but they are, I assume, going to fight for every meter. And then we come down to the Novomykhailivka area. Oh, sorry, to the Mariinka area. Not Novomykhailivka, that's further to the south. We'll get there in a second. Now, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. Right, first of all, so confirmation from Suriyat maps of some gains there for them. Oh, why is my map not changed? That's a little bit odd. It's done something funky there and it's not saved it. Nothing like doing the same thing twice. So now let's have a look at Mariinka, where you can see that there are some gains for the... Oh, it hasn't even saved that properly. Oh, my goodness me. Let's go and start my map again, and you'll see what happens. It's not very quick at saving when I update the original core map. It should have done so by now. Yeah, so, okay. Now we are cooking on gas. We have some gains, as you can see, for the Russians around Mariinka, right across this area. A few blocks going towards the west of Mariinka, pushing the Ukrainians really to the very outskirts. And you might say the writing is on the wall there. Of course, that's coming from Suriyat maps. We'll have to see whether that bears out. When we go to Mariinka, yeah, here it is. So the Russian army managed to capture new blocks in Mariinka, according to them, following an advance along the streets of Uruzhaina, Polyhafichna, and Staktarska. Russian army is in control of 80% of the town, approximately, and that is a worry for the Ukrainians. There's no doubt about that. Interesting, though, when we come down here to Pobieda, and this is something that I've been waiting to see for an awful long time. I'm sure Thierry will be along with me on that one of my viewers and members here that is always saying that certain areas that Suryat maps have mapped, the Russians definitely don't have control of. And this was one of the ones I've been waiting to see change, because Pobieda has been this outpost of a village, of an agricultural community that is really important to stop Mariinka getting encircled. However, I think Mariinka looks like it's going to be lost going straight through the middle. It reminds me very much of Novelska and how important that is to stop Pervomaisky being encircled, and how Severny here and Tonyenka are stopping Avdiivka being encircled. So Pobieda might look fairly insignificant, but actually all of these fields are really well dug in and defended, and these tree lines as well, that it was significant when a long time ago now Suryat maps claimed that the Russians had got into these agricultural buildings here and were in control of all of this area. Now I think they did attack but were repelled months back, but they just had that there, you know, they've had that there for months. Andrew Perpetua in the area is like no, and then that's been walked back without saying anything. So again, I think that's another rejig with a kind of like, yeah, okay, we've got evidence now that the Russians aren't there. I've just been waiting for that particular one for an awful long time. Anyway, no change. So probably no change there. That will be a rejig, and we'll come down to Novomykhailivka, which is between sort of Vuhledar and Mariinka there, to see what has happened in that place. Suryat map says the Russian army took control over a series of defensive positions of the Ukrainian army south of Novomykhailivka. There have been these repeated attempts and quite a bit of mechanized equipment thrown, attempts to take this area, to get right up to Novomykhailivka, such that it is a grey zone right up until you get to the first buildings of the settlement. This is all contested, and I think it is difficult for the Ukrainians around there. It doesn't surprise me that the Russians have made some gains, but that has come over time at quite some cost to the Russians. Nonetheless, you can see that they're chipping away in a number of places, and if Suryat maps is correct, then you start adding all these up, and this is challenging for the Ukrainians, and if you include Bakhmut on that too, difficult stuff. Anyway, to come out of the Eastern Front, just see if the ISW has anything to say about that. No. Well, I mean, they do talk about this, but there are no changes to any of these sort of frontline areas, including Velika Novosilka, where it's still so active, but just kind of, I guess, positional. And it seems the same can be said of Robotyne and Verbove area. So these two main, or what were main areas of the front line, now seeing very little movement on a weekly basis. So I guess that brings us to the Kherson and the areas of Krinky, Pischanivka and Podstepny and Poima, Antonivsky Bridge, where there are no changes to the maps again. And I've been worried about here that it's becoming quite positional, that the Ukrainians will be under a lot of pressure from the Russians. I think they are genuinely under a lot of pressure from the Russians here, and because the Russians know that this is really super important. But for the Russians, it's like, well, what do we throw at this problem? And I'm trying to join the dots here, and, you know, correct me if you think I'm overstepping the mark or whatever, but I've been saying that they probably being forced to rob Peter to pay Paul, so getting troops down from Robotyne to help in Kherson, but they don't really want to do that, right? Because then that weakens other places, and they don't have the reserves in depth. They don't have that strength in depth of reserves that they can pull reserves from, say, Melitopol, Berdyansk, somewhere else to throw into Kherson. That's my guess. And so what do they do? Well, there's some interesting data coming out regarding that. First of all, we go to the ISW that says Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces expanded their zone of control in the western part of Krinky. So that is towards Kozachi Lahiri. So if we come down to Krinky here, you can see that they've still got this central part of Krinky under their control, and they're trying to expand to the east towards Korsunka and to the west towards Kozachi Lahiri and get a much bigger bridgehead on the left bank of the river. Then ISW continues that there is fighting is ongoing near the settlement. Geolocated footage published yesterday shows that Russian forces continue TOS-1A thermobaric artillery strikes on Ukrainian forces operating near Krinky. That's interesting because we saw a TOS-1 taken out around here. And I was saying I doubt you'll see another one for some time. Well, I don't know about the time stamping of that claim. There might well be another one already operating in the area. And the thing about TOS-1 thermobaric piece of equipment is that they only have a sort of 6 kilometer range. So that means that wherever you place them to have an effect on the front line around here, they are going to be very much see, that's what, 22 kilometers, right? So that it can't operate there. So to have a 6 kilometer range, it's going to have to be in front of the Oleshki Sands. Now, that means that every first-person drone under the sun that the Ukrainians are going to be using is going to be able to target that. It is very vulnerable because of that short range. Right, okay, so what are some of the sources saying about the Kherson area? It is reported, says no reports, that in the center of occupied Oleshki, Russians are conducting searches among civilians and military personnel. It's said that they are looking for people who provide assistance to the Ukrainian armed forces. So that's potentially a little bit of panic. We heard yesterday that in Oleshki, the Russian are pulling out their administration. Although some people claim that they were evacuating civilians, that's sure that's not the case. But they've been decreeing that their administration needs to move further to the southeast to Velika Kupani there. So that tells you something. And then now we're hearing this. They're sort of, I don't know, I guess panicking in a sense and searching civilians for people who are collaborating with the Ukrainians as far as they see it. War Gonzo's early morning update this morning on Krinky said in the Kherson Crimean direction, Ukrainian Marines supported by artillery attacked from Krinky on the left bank of the Dnipro and entered the forest belt near the village. The goal is to reach the M14 highway. If success is achieved, the Russian armed forces will have serious problems. This adds up to other sources claiming Ukrainian troops are pushing through the forest and advanced already. Right. This could have been said a week ago, and it's exactly the same. So when the Ukrainians first got a foothold in Krinky, there was talk about them moving through the forest. And in fact, the Russian line was pushed right back here, and then it was rejigged back towards Krinky. So there have been these claims, and that could indicate that really things haven't moved that much. So although War Gonzo is saying they're pushing south into the forest, we have heard those claims every day, really, for a couple of weeks. There are some people that are saying the maps are less charitable to the reality, and actually the Ukrainians have made more gains than people are giving them credit for. But of course, without the evidence to support that, I'd end up, I err on the side of conservatism. Now, this goes to what I was just talking about with regard to what's going on with the Russian reserves in the area. So this is a Russian, fairly well equipped, seems like a decent fighter. So one of your decent troops, but talking about other poorly kind of equipped people. So he said the situation in the effing Kherson direction, it's sad, an expletive or a slang word for Ukrainians. Ukrainians here and Ukrainians there. Thank God no one here yet, as in where he is. F knows what the commanders are doing and deciding. So first thing two things already in that is Ukrainians are everywhere. So that's an interesting observation. Second thing is a complete lack of respect for the command. In other words, in his eyes, the command is either not doing anything or making wrong decisions. Anyway, no idea what the commanders are doing. The problem is that it's all SH1T. So his morale, at third point, his morale is low. And fourth point is not going well for the Russians. All of this can be derived from what he's saying. Today we came across the stormtroopers. So these attack troops. Often they use like penal Storm Z troops to do that, the lower quality troops to do the kind of work that they deem can be done by people who are truly expendable. And that's how the Russians see it, as far as I can see. Well, anyway, he came across the stormtroopers. He came across a fellow Russian who was going to the base. And he says, he asked for the road. We, of course, showed it. He said that they put together all the crooked, blind, broken, this is fascinating, They put together all the crooked, blind, and broken and sent them towards the Ukrainians. So when you're talking about who the Russians are throwing into this Kherson front line as reserves or to try and defend from these Ukrainian attacks, they are getting together all the dregs that aren't committed elsewhere, the broken, the blind, and so on, and they're sending them in to attack the Ukrainians. There you go. And sent them towards the Ukrainians, of course, take this with a pinch of salt. Told them they'll be staying in a house and protect the road. They went to the point and the Ukrainians attacked them from 1.5 kilometers. He said the Ukrainians have 3 drones for each one of ours. So again, going back to what Michael Kaufman and Rob Lee was saying about how the Russians have a drone advantage, numerical drone advantage, I just don't know that that's true, because from all of the Russian sources, videos like this and stuff on Telegram, they can't all be psyops, right? They are complaining that we've heard claims that the skies are black with drones at some points. I mean, that's going back some weeks now, but we are hearing so much that the Ukrainians have, particularly in Kherson, an electronic warfare advantage, that their use of drones far outstrips that of the Russians. So, he said that the Ukrainians have 3 drones for each one of ours. This is very bad and sad. Yesterday, I saw a screen recording from Ukrainian sources, how on the 3rd, they killed 13 of our people in Krinky, he says. I think I know which one he's talking about. It was frightening. It was where a whole load of Russian soldiers were attacking, and they were just running, and they all got mowed down by machine guns, and that was in Krinky. So I'm pretty sure that's that one. It was frightening to watch. A shame, rips your soul apart. He says, "You're so angry at this army. It's not a Russian army. It's a Russian army." I don't quite know what he means by that. Nonetheless, the army was Russian in World War II. Now no one knows what the F's going on. Effing hell. Positions, ranks change all the time. You go to bed one person, wake up another. Again, if you're talking about inferences to make here, like inference and deduction, it's like teaching kids how to read. Inference and deduction here is that something we've heard recently, that actually there are loads of sergeants commanding units where normally they'd have commanders previously, which means that they don't have those ranks to do those roles. One has to assume they've been attrited, and so people are getting promoted up quickly. That talks about massive losses. Now, if that's the case, then you go back to the general staff figures on a daily basis and say, do you know what, these figures are looking more and more accurate because we pieced together all these bits of the jigsaw, and this is one piece of the jigsaw, and they confirm, or at least they don't disconfirm, but they do support the Ukrainian claims. So you go to bed one person, wake up another. Everything is happening in the most effed up way, he says. Nothing is clear and it's all bad. So far, no changes by the command were made. Command seen not only being ineffectual, but actually not doing anything. Can't feel much the fact that we are Marines. We're getting effed like before, but more now. So this is it. So, I mean, he's saying, look, it was bad before, but it's even worse now. So this is it. We will live. Victory will be ours. Although, as I said yesterday, I agree for a draw, for peace. Fascinating. Another bit of inference you can draw from this, which is when the chips are down, like, that's when you sue for peace. So you got someone here saying, yeah, we'll win, like, because he kind of has to say that. It's like, oh, let's call it a draw. Yeah, it's like the Knights. We are the Knights that say, nah. Where he gets his arms and legs chopped off by, this is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and he's like, okay, we'll call it a draw. It's just like, when you're down, that's when you do say those things, and this indicates that he feels that they are down. What's the point? They have the same people on the other side. Interesting. They have their principles, we have ours. This is someone coming to the realization that, do you know what? The Ukrainians are humans. He's a human. They're basically the same people on either side. Just, goodness me. Yes. And I remember reading a story to my kids about and you read them because you have your own baggage that you attach to it. It was a story of a fighter pilot that was bombing and had been shot down and needed to be looked after. and you think, right, this is a German fighter pilot that's been caught over Britain, and he's been shot down, and these two kids, dad's on the front line, mum, or what's she going to do with the pilot? And they try and protect this pilot, and then the pilot eventually gets found out. The mum dobs him in on something, and they're like, but he's got kids just like us, and you feel all this sympathy for this German fighter pilot that's been shot down, and these British kids like looking after him, come to the realization they're just the same as us. And then at the end of the story, you realize that Paul and Anna are actually Paul and Anna, who are German kids, and that was a British fighter bomber pilot that crash landed in Germany, and it was a German mum that shot him into the armed forces, and it messes around with your whole perspective of who the good guys and the bad guys are, because you spent the whole of the story going along thinking that having sympathy for different characters because you assume that they were one nationality, but everyone ends up being the opposite nationality, and it just makes you come away, a very simple story, but maybe you came away from the story thinking, goodness me, both sides have the same opinion of the other side, and they're all humans with families and blah, blah, blah. And so, there's an element of that there. Anyway, sorry for the aside. Pro-Russian channel Romanov, with sources in the area, was very fast to go against Shoigu's words. What was Shoigu's words? Was Shoigu has said that all Ukrainian attempts to conduct amphibious operations in the Kherson direction led to colossal losses. So, again, that's going to be, element of psyops there, propaganda, I think. Although I do think the Ukrainians will be finding things tough. I do think they will be taking losses in Kherson, but evidently it is at least bad for the Russians. And indeed, Romanov is going against what Shoigu says. So, quote, on the attached map are the actual places of presence of the Ukrainian armed forces on the left bank of the Dnipro River, only in a particular settlement, as well as the actual routes of passage of the Ukrainian armed forces to the settlement from the bank of the Dnipro River. And I have cropped this map a lot. I would also like to note that the arrival of FAB with a beautiful video in the distance does not always mean hitting a specific target. I almost showed you this morning, an FAB, but you couldn't really make out what was going on. But there's a big FAB hitting around Krinky, and lots of people saying, oh, Ukraine is being hit, blah, blah, blah. And I think he's talking about that video. And he's saying, I'd also like to note the arrival of the FAB with a beautiful video in the distance does not always mean hitting a specific target. Very far from always. And there's also Pischanivka and Pidstepny. In other words, that they use these guide bombs and they explode, and you might get nice drone footage of them exploding, doesn't mean they actually hit what they were intended to hit, or that the targets hadn't moved since then, or whatever. And so here's someone that is talking to a lack of accuracy with those munitions, as well as there being issues in Pischanivka and Pidstepny down the road. And then here we have no reports saying another date from the Russian Channel 2 majors, citing sources in the area of Krinky. Quote, hello, I'd like to share my combat experience of working near the Krinky settlement. The only pluses are probably two guys from Wagner who taught the detachment personnel a lot, including me. Because of this, we only get by with a load of 300 wounded. The work takes place in very harsh conditions, especially in such weather as it is now. Rain, wet, snow, wind, swamps and mud. If it were not for the purchase of equipment, appropriate clothing and the help of volunteers, many people would have already fallen ill. So the idea that they're getting winter kit from volunteers, not from the MOD, I think it tells a lot. Let's move on. The lack of aerial reconnaissance with drones slows down any of our movements very much and puts the lives of our guys at risk. Again, talks to who has a drone advantage. You always expect an ambush because the Ukrainian recon troops are walking everywhere. Lack of fire support from artillery and mortars. It is there, but after several shots they leave because active counter-battery work is underway in the forest behind us. Fascinating. So the Russians do occasionally pop off your counter-battery shells, but then after two shots, you've got 3 minutes before counter-battery can hit you, 3 to 6 minutes, and you want to be out there definitely by 6 minutes, but really 3 minutes, and that only gives you a couple of shots. So that tracks a lot. If I'm not mistaken, there was a number of mortar crews. In total, they fired about 20 mortars when they began to fly at them for your understanding. Not sure about the translation there. The last very problematic issue is intersection with neighbouring units. It is practically non-existent, but here again, Wagner decides through old contacts found people with whom we are now actively working up to the evacuation of guys in case of emergency. Fascinating. So you've got some Wagner guys who are now being drafted into this unit. You've got the unit next door along the river in the Krinky area, the next Russian unit. But there's no formal communication between units. There's no cohesion through the command. It's only that this guy's got a Wagner guy, this unit's got a Wagner guy, the unit's got a couple of Wagner guys, and they talk to each other, and they're the ones that are pulling the strings and enforcing some kind of inter-unit cohesion. In general, the picture is that the headquarters is given the wrong picture for delayed for a few days, because of which the planning is not quite successful. Well, and one more thing, we have a lot of people with no experience in combat. So again, who's being thrown at the front line here? This plus one fear in the piggy bank. The situation when a man has a weapon and is very afraid is not pleasant. And when the commanders are alarmists and shout about recon, I'm silent. It's a bit mixed up there, but you get the point that things are not looking good. And then we hear about this. Very similar, like for like, with the award ceremony that happened near Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians covered the gathering of a Russian 810th Marine Brigade in the Kherson region, although I have heard that this happened in Starobashevy, which is, as far as I can work out, southeast of Donetsk. However, it's probably another one that's actually in Kherson. Anyway, the strike was inflicted on a gathering of Russian troops during an award ceremony in honor of the Day of Russian Missile Troops and Artillery. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians appear to have a day for everything. This is our Special Operations Forces Day. This is our Naval Forces Day. This is our Marines Day. This is our people who walk with a limp on a Tuesday day. So they have that. Every day there seems to be one. The Russians had one and did an award ceremony, and the Ukrainians hit them, causing 25 dead and 100 injured. There is some evidence of that. I can't show you the other picture because we've got inappropriate stuff in, like dead bodies and whatnot. So, yeah, it's looking like I don't think this is a tit for tat information battle. Like, I don't think the Ukrainians are making this up to try and match what the Russians have done. We have seen that previously. Certainly the Russians seem good at that and try and do this projection thing. But I think there appears to be evidence of this, and this is Magyar, who is your drone dude. So I'm fairly confident that did happen. 25 dead and 100 injured is a big loss. Anyway, there you go. That's what's going on the front line. I like to bring in these sources because I really do think these Russian voices do give us a sense of what might well be going on the front line. And it's really important to kind of read between the lines. And I think now I am much more justified in thinking they are bringing very poor level reserves to helping Kherson, the Russians, because they don't have any other option, and that speaks volumes. And then you just think, wow, if the Ukrainians just had themselves more, then they'll be able to break through in certain places, because the Russians, I think, are very thinly arranged. But then that could also be because they have taken a load of troops and tried to attack in Avdiivka and other places where they're sensing success. So, I mean, both sides are arguably robbing Peter to pay Paul in any number of places along the front line. It's a game of, whack-a-mole, and who's got a blanket that can cover most of the bed, and moving it one direction leaves you bare in another direction. So I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.